Settling అయిపోయిందా? Yes, discussions, there won't be any full stop, right? But I have to put a full stop here. So let's discuss the first article from mains perspective is right to vote and right to be elected. So this is important from GS paper 2, polity and constitution. Okay, for the freshers I'm just giving the syllabus also. CubeSats, GS paper 3, science and technology, space especially, and you also have European Artificial Intelligence Convention. This is also GS 3, science and technology only. Then onset of monsoon, GS paper 1, geography, Zero Debris Charter, GS 3 again SNT, space, economic cost of climate change. This is with respect to GS 3, environment. Then private sector in space, again so many things from science and technology this week. Space technology. Then some of the topics are important from prelims perspective. Okay, so then without any delay, let's start. The first article is right to vote and right to be elected. So what is the difference here? You have observed right to vote and right to be elected. Is there any difference or both the same? Different, right? Right to vote is there for you all. Right to be elected, not all are you enjoying, right? Because for Lok Sabha or assembly elections, you need to have certain age, which is not there for you, I think, for most of you as of now. Okay, so right to vote is a different right. Right to be elected is a different right. But for whom these type of rights are there? What is the legal recognition for these rights? Whether these are fundamental rights, constitutional or statutory rights. Okay, what is the position of Supreme Court? Who can contest elections, who cannot contest elections, or who can vote in elections, who cannot vote? All these aspects you have to see. Okay, so why we are going to discuss is one person who was arrested already and he was in jail, Amritpal Singh. Okay, so who is famously associated with Khalistani movement. Okay, so Khalistani movement means, you know, separatist movement in Punjab, where they wanted to form Khalistan, a separate land for Sikhs. Okay, so he was associated with the Khalistani movement. He was arrested way back in April itself. Okay, so then what happened? Now being in jail. Okay, so I'm not saying he was just arrested and he was in jail. I'm not saying he was acquitted or convicted. So he was an under trial. So he wants to contest from one particular constituency in Punjab. So that means a person who is under custody in jail or in prison, can he contest the elections or not? Is there any provision allowing or is there any provision disallowing? This is what you have to understand. Okay, so with respect to this, if you see, even though a person who is under custody or in jail also, they have no bar in contesting elections. That means there is no limitation set. That means even by being in jail also they can contest elections. But nomination papers, you may get some question, who has to file the nomination papers? Means generally the candidates they themselves file the nomination papers before the returning officers, right? Then what is in this case means, instead of him, some other representative can file the nomination papers to the returning officer, or he can also do that to the jail superintendent and all some other persons. So then they will forward it to the returning officers. In this way, there is a provision even for this. So what you have to understand here, there is no bar on right to contest. Right to contest means for any particular constituency, if you have any certain limitation, like for example, if you are qualifying to be citizen of India, 25 years of age, and if you don't have any office of profit, then you can contest for Lok Sabha. There is no bar. They didn't say that the persons who are under custody or jail are prohibited from such things. That is clear. Okay. Then what about right to vote? Right to vote, is it a constitutional right, fundamental right, or statutory right? Statutory right. But Article 326 is providing some right to vote. No, then why don't you say it as a constitutional right? If it is mentioned in the constitution, why don't you consider it a constitutional right? Did there is any mention that this is only a statutory right? Who mentioned it? What is the difference between a fundamental right, constitutional right, and a legal right? First, have this clarity. Yes, anyone can answer these three. Only those you call as fundamental right. In case if I want to add another one, then amend. But that doesn't mean only from 12 to 35 you have fundamental rights, right? What is a fundamental right? Then what is human right? Not exactly. Yes. Any other definition for fundamental right? There are so many veterans, freshers, and you have some people in between who are most intelligent than the freshers and veterans. Yes? Basic structure. What is fundamental right? What is basic structure? That gap you have to fill, no? Okay. See, fundamental right is nothing but which is guaranteed by the fundamental law of the land, that is Constitution of India, which is guaranteeing you. That means in case if any of your fundamental right is getting violated, there is some protection also in the form of a remedy. So there is no way that your fundamental right can be violated. In case if it is violated, you can get some remedy, and the person who have violated will get some punishment for it. So it is being backed by the fundamental law of the land, which is a Constitution of India. That is why we are naming them as fundamental rights. Who is backing you? For example, you have 10 rupees note. If I say that is not Indian currency, then you can argue with me, it is having legal tender, because government of India is backing it, that this is the official currency in India, you have to accept it. Yes or no? Same way here, Constitution is also giving the guarantee that these are the fundamental rights given to the citizens as well as some other persons sometimes, and no one can violate it. That is a fundamental right. You have in part 3, 12 to 35 articles. Then what is a constitutional right? Other than fundamental rights, whichever the rights that are mentioned in the Constitution, other than part 3, 12 to 35 are considered as constitutional rights. Then what are legal rights or statutory rights? Which are given by statute or the law, but they are not mentioned in the Constitution. They are not even fundamental rights. Those we call as statutory rights or legal rights. Okay. But what is the question about right to vote means, again, there is lot of confusion in interpretation whether it is a constitutional right or legal right. But Supreme Court said most of the times that it is a legal right. Okay, statutory right. But according to UPSC, answer is constitutional right, because already they have asked a question, and at that time it also had led to a controversy, but in the official key they have given answer as the constitutional right. So you also have to agree until unless you quit UPSC. Okay. So till then you have to agree that right to vote is a constitutional right, because Article 326 is giving you right to vote as a constitutional right. Okay. That is what. In case if your right to vote is violated, then like fundamental rights, you may not get same equivalent remedy, but there is a remedy. You might have seen the movie of Tala, Vijay, Talapati or something, the name he had, right? Sarkar, in which his vote will be casted by some other person, he'll fight. Okay, so because the Constitution did not itself mention about the right to vote, okay, in case what happens if it is infringed and all, but section 8 of Representation of People's Act, there is some mention in it. That means there is some legal backing from a law, but not by the Constitution. That is what we call as a legal right or statutory right. That means in case if it is violated through that law, what is that law giving you? The protective measures, you can enforce that. So first thing you have to understand is, according to UPSC it is constitutional right, according to Supreme Court it is legal right. Okay, in many Supreme Court judgments it said time and then it is a legal right only, but UPSC has stick to the particular source as constitutional right only. Okay, that is what I am saying. In NCRTs, that is what always any faculty will stress upon. Whatever is written in NCRTs is the paramount. In NCRTs, it is written as right to vote as a constitutional right if you go from the 6th class. So that is where, in case if you having legal knowledge and awareness of what about happenings and all, then you cannot say it as a legal right, because what is there in the government, I'm not saying NCRTs, government publications, whatever they say, that is the ultimate thing which UPSC will take into consideration. That is why always you cannot go for any private authors. They don't have any backup, but NCRTs or Government of India publications, so go with NCRTs. What is written in NCRT, even though if it is wrong also it is correct. So what is happening in this case is, see, there is no bar on right to contest or right to be elected. So every Indian, okay, they after following certain criteria like being citizen of India of certain age without having office of profit, they can contest from any constituency, okay, according to the requirement. But right to vote, you know, generally right to vote we have understood it is a constitutional right. But what is the criteria? Only a citizen of India with 18 years of age, okay. So 18 years and above can qualify to be a voter in India, right? Previously it used to be 21 years, it was reduced to 18 by 61st Constitutional Amendment in 1988, okay. So 61st Constitutional Amendment in 1988 has reduced the age of voting from 21 to 18, okay. When this was done, till then Election Commission of India used to be a single member body. That means only one Chief Election Commissioner used to be there, no other members to assist. But when suddenly 3 years reduced during Rajiv Gandhi's prime ministership at that time, what happened is, to accumulate that workload will increase, no, when 3 years got decreased and so many new voters get inducted into the voter list, right? That is why they made single member body into a multi-member body by adding 2 other election commissioners also from then, okay. That means from 1990s, EC is working as a 3-member body, 1 plus 2, okay. So that is what you have to understand. Then we also have understood right to be elected, no. Then right to vote, if you see, not only this, a citizen of India having 18 years of age, but not only these things will make you qualify for right to vote, because if any person is under detention in the sense in the jail, he cannot be qualified to be a voter. There is a bar on this. There is no bar on right to contest, but there is a bar on right to vote. If any person is under custody, then that person cannot vote in the elections. That is what you have to understand. But again, there are some exceptions here. That is most important. A person under preventive detention, a person under bail is qualified to be exercising right to vote. You understood? A person who is under custody in jail, he cannot vote. But a person under preventive detention, I'll explain what is preventive detention, and a person released on bail, those 2 persons can vote. But a person who is in jail, okay, so we don't know, but that person may be accused or convicted, or we don't know all these things, but still his case is going on. What we call that particular person as under trial, right? Under trial means a person who is not acquitted or convicted, his case is still pending before the courts. Those we call as under trials. So with respect to under trials, they don't have any right to vote. That is very sympathetic situation, right? They were not even accused, they were just accused, they are not even convicted, but still we don't know whether they are proven guilty or not also. They may be innocent also, but still they were denied right to vote. What is Supreme Court saying with respect to this? Supreme Court said it had its own reasons to say, but many times so many persons have filed public interest litigations before Supreme Court asking even they also have to have right to vote, because they are also citizens of India, they are also having 18 years of age, then why don't they cast their vote? And why you are allowing some person with criminal background? Again here also these persons are arrested. Then why are you allowing them to contest elections when they can't vote? Contesting elections is some more bigger than that, right? Then why are you allowing this? So there are so many cases before the Supreme Court, but time and then Supreme Court has upheld that right to vote is subjected to certain limitations. I'll explain those limitations, but first you have to understand what is preventive detention. Preventive detention means under Article 22 of Indian Constitution, there is a protection against arrest as well as detention, okay, for certain persons. One part of Article 22 is punitive. Punitive detention means what is punitive detention means after committing some offense, Okay, so you have done something wrong. If you have done something wrong, then police will arrest you, right? Detaining means nothing but police is stopping your liberty. Yes or no? So arrest is nothing but when your liberty is deprived of. That's it, right? So you cannot use your mobile phones, you cannot chill out, you cannot venture out. These are the things which are restrained, right? So that is what? Depriving of liberty is nothing but detention. Okay? So punitive detention means when some person have committed some offense, in that particular offense, okay, so it can be before the court also. At that time, the person also have some rights. What type of rights? 3 types of rights. Right to be informed of the grounds of arrest. So in movies also you will be seeing, no? Whenever any person, especially the villains, when they're getting arrested, what happens? They'll ask you why, on what basis you're arresting me. So it is a right for any person, in case if you're being arrested, you have the right to know the grounds of arrest. On what basis you're arresting, okay, that person. So right to be informed the grounds of arrest is a primary right. Any person generally who is after committing a offense, punitive is after committing some offense, okay, he has the right to be informed the grounds of arrest. Second thing is he has right to be produced before the magistrate. Magistrate means a judge, okay, before a magistrate within 24 hours of his arrest. This is excluding journey time, okay, without calculating the journey time from the place of arrest till the magistrate's place. So without counting the journey time, within 24 hours of arrest, he has to be produced before a magistrate. Okay, if he is not getting produced before 24 hours, then he can file for bail. Okay, that is another type of right. And third type of right is right to consult legal practitioner. Who is a legal practitioner? Advocate or lawyer. Okay, so he can have a right. That is why a person cannot be deprived of his legal aid. That also we have given as part of Directive Principles 39A. Every person is entitled to get free legal aid. Okay, so even if he's not having money also, he's entitled to get legal aid. These are the certain rights which are available for certain kinds of persons who were arrested under punitive detention. Okay, punitive means after committing some offense. But this is one part of Article 22. Whereas in second part you have what I told you now is preventive detention. Preventive detention. So you have seen here these persons, punitive detention, these are under jail custody, no? So these persons doesn't have any right to contest. They have right to contest, they don't have right to vote. Okay, so they cannot enjoy here. See, they were in a custody means 2 chances can be there. They can be acquitted. Acquitted means they can be proven innocent and they can be released from jail. There is also one possibility, right? And another case is conviction. Conviction means when that person is proven guilty of that crime, then he can be sentenced to a particular type of punishment or a sentence. That is what. So 2 chances are there, but no, without knowing these 2 chances also, you are depriving him the right to vote. So here in this situation, this person doesn't have right to vote until unless only one chance is if he is released on bail. Bail means a temporary release. Only if he is on bail, okay, then only he can cast his vote. Otherwise, in punitive detention, who is detained, he cannot exercise his right to vote. Clear? Then we have second type of detention is preventive. What is the primary difference here? Punitive means after committing some crime or offense, but this is before only. Can we arrest any person then? That means yes. Okay, because in case if I get some information that you're organizing some particular attack on any person, or if you're going to plan any terrorist attack or something, at that time without committing the offense also, knowing that information, I can detain you. That is what we call as preventive detention. Preventive means to stop someone from doing the detention. That means we are not waiting till the action or the offense happen. That is what preventive detention is. For these persons, there is right to vote. Because again, here also, that person may commit a crime, may not commit a crime. There is two possibilities. In case if he commits a crime, then also he is getting the right to vote, right? But here, why these persons are deprived? He may be acquitted or he may be convicted. If he is convicted also, he is a citizen, he is 18 years of age, then why don't you give? Is it correct or not? You are depriving of a person right to vote. On what basis? Is there any rationale here? Yes or no? There is no rationale. But Supreme Court is allowing them right to vote. Okay? Preventive detention, they have right to vote because there is no actual occurrence of crime, right? They may do or they may not do also. Two chances are there. So for them and for those persons who are under bail, for those two persons only right to vote is there. For all other persons who are in custody of the police or in jail, they are not entitled to exercise their right to vote, but they can contest elections. Okay? So what is the Supreme Court stand is, when many petitions were filed, what Supreme Court said is, when a person is arrested, that immediately says that that person's liberties get constrained, right? When you are arrested means, like a common man, you cannot use all your liberties. So that is also subject to some restrictions. So here also, he cannot exercise his right to vote. That is what one justification Supreme Court said. And second thing they said is resource crunch. Resource crunch means for those persons who were under custodies and all, we cannot take all those persons out of the prison. Again, you need to have security, infrastructure and all these things, no? You cannot escort them. So there is lot of demand on the police and so much burden. Already during elections, police will have lot of things to do. But at the same time, if you are giving them right to vote, okay, they all have to come out of jail, police have to escort them, they have to take to the particular polling stations. Again, after casting their vote, they have to be taken to the prisons and all. So this is involving lot of resource management and all. So Supreme Court said we are not having enough resource management, okay, with respect to this. Coming to that, wait. Okay, there is no resources. That is what third Supreme Court said. And fourth they said is, this is not a clear violation of Article 14, because whenever the cases were filed before the Supreme Court, on what basis they have challenged is, one, for these persons who are not entitled to right to vote, Article 14, 19, 1A, because right to vote is also fundamental freedom of speech and expression, right? You are expressing your choice in the form of vote. So 14, 19, 1A and Article 21 are getting violated. So some person said this is against the constitution. So you also have to grant them right to vote. Then Supreme Court said, no, right to vote is not itself a constitutional right or a fundamental right. Then how we can give them? This is just a legal right. So legal rights are subjected to certain restrictions. That is why we are not allowing the right to vote for the persons who are under custody. This is what three reasons said by Supreme Court, and many cases they have said the same thing. They did not change their stand. Coming to your point, that is still pending because we are not even giving the postal ballot for all the persons in the recent times. Only we are expanding the ambit. And then if you see what is the status is, in 1500 jails, 5 lakh plus under trials are there. Under trials only I am giving the data. Under trials means who is not acquitted or convicted. Their case is still pending. Okay, 5 lakh under trials are there. And how many prisoners are there who are acquitted or who are convicted? It can be more, right? For all these persons, giving postal ballot is a difficult situation in India as of now existing. But some countries like France, Finland, Croatia, Canada, these type of countries are giving right to vote for the persons who are even sentenced in jail. For example, Australia, if you take, that particular country is giving the right to vote from jail also for persons who got convicted with offences less than 3 years punishment. Okay, if it is less than 3 years, they are giving right to vote through post, they can send it. But if it is more than 3 years, they consider it as a serious offence, then their choice of vote is not counted because they have committed some ill wrong or something you can consider. Then in some other countries like Canada, they can also send their vote through email. These are all the provisions existing outside India, but in India, Supreme Court says because of these 3 restrictions, you cannot exercise your right to vote. Okay, this is what you have to understand. So clear now, who are under jail, they can contest elections, but they cannot vote. Okay, this is the first thing. But for example, if any person already he got elected, okay, then afterwards he got convicted. I am saying before elections or before contesting, they have right to contest. But after getting elected as an MP or MLA, then they got convicted in an offence. Then what is the criteria then? Can their seat be retained or they have to quit their membership? He already became MP or MLA, ma. Okay, then he got convicted. Convicted means he was proven guilty. Court said yes, this person have committed a crime. Then can that member have the same membership in the house or he has to vacate that membership? No exception. No. For arrest only that is. See, don't say generally, but in case if the punishment is greater than 2 years, greater than or equal to 2 years, then only they have to vacate their membership. Okay, they stand disqualified from the date of conviction. The same thing happened in Rahul Gandhi's case also. Have you seen recent times? When Gujarat High Court, first Surat District High Court said, yes, this person is convicted. Then he challenged the same thing in Gujarat High Court. Then also the same was said, reiterated by Gujarat High Court. Then he challenged the same thing in Supreme Court. Then what happened? Supreme Court said it is ordering stay on his conviction. But till then, immediately when the Gujarat High Court and even before that Surat District Court said, immediately Lok Sabha Secretary General, immediately he gave the order of disqualification. I don't know how proactive they became at that point of time. On the very same date. Generally in India, you know how time lag happens in any process and all. But on that day, same date of conviction, when the order was passed first, they have issued an order of disqualification. Because he was also sentenced with punishment of 2 years. 2 or more than 2. But what you have to understand is, if any person already elected gets convicted for 2 or more years, he stands disqualified. But whenever he comes out of prison, after completing 2 years, till then he disqualifies, no? After coming from the date of release, for the next 6 years, he cannot contest elections. Everyone knows that 6 years, but it is not from the date of conviction. It is from the date of release from the jail. Okay? Whenever he comes out from then particular date to 6 years, he cannot again contest elections. This is a good thing only. But again, depriving them right to vote is a bad thing, right? Because they are even not proven guilty. If they are proven guilty, you deprive them. Okay? But so many criminals are entering into politics, and you know, officially also, almost 60% of MPs and MLAs have certain criminal records on them. So you are having them as people's representatives, then why don't you allow these persons? Yes or no? It's clear violation of right to equality under 14, 19, 1A. Yes or no? So these are the issues that is being faced. Okay. In this particular case, this is section 8 clause 3 of Representation of People's Act 1951. Lily Thomas versus Union of India case. Same thing was said by Lily Thomas versus Union of India case. The same thing was reiterated by Supreme Court. Okay. So if they were convicted of 2 or more years of imprisonment, then they stand disqualified from their membership, and next to 6 years they cannot contest elections. This is what? If they come out of jail, they can vote. But again, coming out of jail from that day to 6 years, they cannot contest election, any election in India. If they're out of jail, they can vote like any other men. Okay. So this is what you have to understand. For example, after completing 2 years of imprisonment or more, okay, so he came out of jail. Then I told you from the date of coming out of jail, 6 years, no? This 6 years period can be decreased by Election Commission of India. There is some provision also given to Election Commission of India that 6-year disqualification period generally applies. But in case if Election Commission of India thinks, okay, so it's not proper to have that much time for his disqualification and all, it can decrease also. The same thing happened when Sikkim Chief Minister, okay, Pema Khandu was arrested and he was convicted, and in the meantime only, within 1 year he came out from the jail. But at that time, the disqualification, because he was originally awarded with more than 2 years of imprisonment. So at that time, Election Commission has decreased his sentence of disqualification from contesting elections. So you have to keep these things clearly in mind, right? So I have shown you here, right to vote and right to be elected both are considered as statutory rights. Okay, this is what Supreme Court stand is. What are the cases you have to keep in mind here? 1975 Indira Gandhi case. What the Supreme Court said? Free and fair elections are part of basic structure of Indian Constitution. Basic structure means which Parliament cannot amend. Okay, Parliament can also, it cannot amend these things. That is what we consider as basic structure. So one of such thing is free and fair elections. That is why we need to ensure this. And also you can see right to be elected and right not to be elected also, they don't have same status. This is what you have to understand. Then in 2006 also, in Kuldeep Nair versus Union of India case also, what they said? It's not a fundamental right. What is not a fundamental right? Right to vote. It is just a statutory right. Okay. Then the same was also said with respect to right to be elected also. Right to be elected is also said as statutory right only. Then with respect to disqualification on conviction for certain offences, I told you. Section 8, clause 3 especially of Representation of People's Act says if any person who is convicted of 2 years or more, he will be disqualified from his membership. Then exceptions I told you. Who is having the power? It is very much important. Election Commission has the power to decrease the sentence for disqualification. Okay. The same thing happened with respect to Sikkim Chief Minister in 2019. Then section 11 is empowering this. Under this only, Election Commission can decrease the disqualification sentence. Section 11 of Representation of People's Act. Then you can see bar against right to vote for confined persons. Whatever we have discussed, that who is under custody cannot vote, I told you, no, that is under section 62 clause 5 of Representation of People's Act. So this is restraining the persons who are under custody from exercising their right to vote. Okay, they cannot vote. So section 62, it is saying individuals with criminal charges only, that is not proven guilty or innocent, we don't know. Who is with criminal charges, he cannot be voted. Okay, he cannot participate in voting only until he is on bail or he was acquitted. Acquitted means he was completely released free. Only in those situations only he can exercise his vote. In 1997, the same thing was again upheld by the Supreme Court in Ankul Chandra Pradhan versus Union of India case. Okay, where they tried to get the voting rights for the persons who were arrested, but Supreme Court said no, we are not giving because it requires so much of manpower and they have certain restrictions on their liberties. Okay, so if police escort them, okay, so you know they may try to escape, killing the police or and all these things. So sometimes security issues also can arise from these things. So they said no. Then grounds on which Supreme Court rejected is it is only a statutory right, and at the same time there are some restrictions. There are certain limitations. This is what you have to keep in mind, right? Clear with this? So what is the conclusion in case if a question is asked in mains? What do you suggest? Whether the persons under custody have to be given right to vote or no? Yes or no? Yes, right? Because we are not even proving them as guilty, right? There is a chance can be guilty or can be innocent also. At that time, depriving them right to vote, which is a statutory or constitutional right, is also wrong. Again, okay? So let's expect some positive thing in this regard. The next topic we have is CubeSat. Okay? So you already have discussed some parts in geography that Earth's heat budget. You know what is the concept of Earth's heat budget, right? Heat budget means whatever the Earth that is receiving the sun's radiation, the same amount will be reflected back. Okay? So it will try to maintain a balance in the temperatures, what it have received. So the same thing. But if you see, this is the Earth, right? Here you have northern pole, which we call Arctic, and the southern pole is Antarctic. Okay, so the pole in the northern part and southern part is emitting the radiation, but the emitting radiation from the Earth back into the atmosphere is in the form of infrared radiation and also far infrared radiation. Okay, so here till now we are having some mathematical calculation that 51%, 49%, this balance we are understanding, but the radiation that is getting reflected from the northern pole and the southern pole is in the form of far infrared radiation, and we couldn't estimate how that is happening, why that is happening. We don't have some proper equipment, okay, to study with respect to this, especially from the northern and southern pole. NASA has launched a mission called Pre-Fire mission. Pre-Fire. Okay, so this is the name of the mission in which they have launched CubeSats. Cube, you know Rubik cube, right? Rubik cube, which you play generally. In the same size, you have the satellite also. That is why we name them as CubeSat or Cube satellite. Okay, so the same size you can see in which they operate. So what is the objective of this is to monitor how much is the heat budget, okay, that is getting reflected from the northern pole and the southern pole in the name of or in the way of infrared radiation. That is the objective of this mission. Okay, so by understanding that, we can understand what is the heat budget from this particular place. So here, to understand this, you need to know what is a CubeSat. Okay, CubeSat means small satellite which generally will be less than 2 kgs only, very lightweight. Okay, that means it is very easy to prepare also. It will be simple in technology and design also, yes or no, when it is less than 2 kgs, around 1.3, 1.5 kgs only. So it is very easy. Okay, in 2 years of time you can prepare it. Generally satellites require a lot of time to handle these things and all. But what happened here, although they have is many things which are in their positive, but they have limited lifetime. Again, when they can be easily operative, they can only operate for certain period only. Okay, beyond normally 2 years, they don't function. That is again negative we have with respect to CubeSats. But what is the main mission here is to understand the heat emissions in the Arctic and Antarctic. And here you need to know what is electromagnetic spectrum. So you know what is electromagnetic spectrum? There are certain rays, right? What are those? Radio waves, microwaves, then infrared rays you have. In this infrared only you have near infrared, middle infrared, again far infrared. Okay, then visible light, then UV rays, good, then X-rays, then gamma rays. This is what the electromagnetic spectrum we have. So these are of high energy, yes or no? High energy or low energy? High energy. Or the gamma rays with low energy or high energy? I'm asking gamma rays of high energy or low energy. Why confusion this or of high energy? Here you have low wavelength, inversely proportional, right? On the other hand, radio waves have low energy, high wavelength. Okay, this is what you need to know. Here whatever we have, this infrared rays, especially again in the category far infrared rays, these through this particular waves we are having the heat budget from the polar regions, especially northern pole and southern pole. To understand this particular emission part from the polar region, this CubeSats were put in some particular place in the space to identify through the mission called Pre-Fire mission. Polar what is the full form? Polar. Yes. Who is saying? A bit louder. This is a pre-fire mission. Okay, this is the name of the mission in which CubeSats were placed to identify the heat budget of the northern pole and the southern pole. Okay, this is objective. Then you can see this is a heat budget. Okay, so you can see how much is coming, 100%. So you can see 100% again how it is getting deflected. Okay, when it is reaching, again something is scattered back by different things like clouds reflected back, again water vapor is reflecting back, and you can see even the earth is also sending back. So whatever that we receive is in the form of light wave, short wave radiation. Here we are sending it back in the form of infrared wave radiation, that is long wave radiation. So where UPSC asks a question is in the name of radiations. Okay, they don't ask you this percentage, they never ask you this numbers and percentage, but they can ask you what we are receiving is in the name of short wave radiation, what we are reflecting back is in the name of infrared long wave radiation. So this is what you have to keep in mind, so that we are maintaining a balance of what we are receiving and what we are emitting back. That is what heat budget is. So you can see what is the main advantage here of this CubeSats is because of low weight, low cost also, right? So when we are having less material used, low cost. So it is very easy to assemble also in design, technology is also simple, and many other advantages also you have. Okay, so you can place it anywhere. But what actually happens is there are different types of small satellites. See, PSLV and all these are huge satellites, but small satellites, launch vehicles also we have. No, what are all small satellites means these. So even CubeSats, small sats means which is less than 180 kg, but CubeSats are how much? Only even less than 2 kgs only. This is a special category. Mini satellite means 100 to 180 kg, micro means 10 to 100 kgs, nano means 1 to 10 kg, picosat means 0.01 to 1 kilogram, less than a kilogram. This is the shortest you can say, and compared to the others. And you also have femto satellite, which is even lesser than pico satellite, okay, or pico. So these are the variations in the small satellites. So the smallest satellite is this. Then, so this is pre-fire mission. So they want to launch 2 particular missions into the space, but first one got recently launched. So you can see totally they are going to send the CubeSats up to 525 kilometers right from the surface of the earth and also in the polar orbit. So what is the objective? They wanted to understand the heat radiation into the space by launching near the Arctic and Antarctic. So this will understand how this radiation is getting reflected back, to study far infrared radiation from the Earth's poles using 2 CubeSats. Okay, one is launched now, one is another one pending. So what is the significance? To understand the Earth's energy budget. At the same time, there is no way currently, we cannot assess. From other parts of the Earth, we are understanding how much is the radiation that is reflecting back. But from the poles, we are having no equipment as of now to understand how much is radiating back. That is why this CubeSat mission was launched by NASA. Clear? The next topic we have is Europe's AI convention. What is artificial intelligence? What is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence means it is a situation where what the task generally human perform, in case if the machines perform the same task, we call it as artificial intelligence. Okay, some under artificial intelligence you again have some network like machine learning, internet of things. These are all under subset of artificial intelligence. So why there is a need, you know, in the recent times we are using artificial intelligence in a many more way actually, but again there is a lot of debate. So because artificial intelligence can create some benefits, at the same time it can cause some disruptions also. When artificial intelligence is increasing, there is a fear of job loss. So if you have any other person before, now replacing that person, if you just have a mobile through ChatGPT, you can do anything, right? So that is also leading to job losses and all. That is a problem we have. So with respect to this, again, if the artificial intelligence is being misused, there have to be certain rules and regulations, right? So that is why Europe, under Europe also you have Council of Europe. This is one of the body. They have brought this convention. Okay, this is not the first time in Europe. We already have General Data Protection Act also passed by European Union. So these are certain laws they bring generally with respect to safeguarding the rights. Okay, when we are using any technology, sometimes there can be some harm also being done. Okay, so for example, your right to privacy or your right to data, all these things can be disclosed. So that is again a violation of certain fundamental and basic human rights. That is why this was signed. So here you have to understand, this was signed by a body called Council of Europe. Okay, they have signed this. So what you have to know, this Council of Europe is a international political organization launched in 1949 to protect human rights, rule of law and democracy. So what is rule of law? No one can be above the law. Yes, and is that only thing under rule of law? Rule of law means absence of arbitrary power. Arbitrary means vague. Okay, so there should be limited power. There should not be any unlimited power. Okay, this is what first principle of rule of law. Then equality before law, which you can say no one is above the law. Everyone is equal before the law. Then third principle says rights give birth to the constitution. These are three important pillars of rule of law. This concept was proposed by A.V. Dicey, a British jurist. He has given this, and we have taken this rule of law and we have taken equality before law under Article 14 of Indian Constitution, right? So equality before law, absence of arbitrary power, these two were taken from rule of law concept in. But what happened is, here in Indian case, the third component of rule of law is, because in India it's not the rights which is giving birth to the constitution, but in the reverse case. That means constitution itself is giving the birth to the rights, because constitution is giving fundamental rights, certain constitutional rights, certain legal rights and all. That means constitution itself is giving rights. It's not the reverse case. So only two principles, 1 and 2 principles of rule of law only applied in Indian case. Third one is not applicable in India. Okay. To maintain human rights. Human rights means by virtue of being born as a human, what are the certain rights you need to enjoy? Those are basic human rights. Those rights. Democracy means where people has to participate in the collective decision making through the representatives or by themselves. So these things have to be maintained. That is why Artificial Intelligence Convention was signed. So before that, you just need to know what is the difference between convention and a protocol. You will be hearing this in the international relations and environment most often. So you have convention and protocol. Convention means which deals with a broader thing. Okay. So broader thing means, again, for example, if what is one dot of connection among you all means, you say you are all the students of Ekam IS, right? But what is a protocol means, again in the protocol you belong to specific batches, right? So that means in convention there can be many protocols, right? So what you have to understand is the difference between convention and a protocol. Convention is a broader thing and protocol is the part of convention which can be many in number. It need not be one like convention, okay? So what is this with respect to Europe's AI convention is, this convention was made as a legally binding convention. Legally binding means whichever the country in Europe that signs this convention, they have to adhere to these norms. In case if they don't adhere, what happens? Then they can be legal actions taken against the government. So first most important thing is legally binding. It is mandatory to implement the convention and its norms in the member states. Then it is equally applicable to the private as well as public authorities. So it is not only against government authorities, whatever the AI convention rules and norms are there. So even it is applicable to the private persons also. Then especially in these three sectors it is focusing. That is another thing you have to keep in mind. It is placing some obligations on the government. These are certain things which you need to know the features. Here you can see. One more thing is, this is a political organization that has signed this particular convention for entire Europe, especially these particular countries which are part of Council of Europe. This is political organization. You can see this is one of the oldest intergovernmental organization which was signed in World War II, post World War II period. You can see then it is headquartered in France. Okay, so then members are 46 members. That means all these member states to Council of Europe, 46 member countries, they have to adhere to this Europe's AI convention. That means whatever that is written in the convention, they have to follow it. In case if they don't follow, legal actions can be taken. So then you can see what is this concern is, there is with a artificial intelligence and all. So there is some violation of human rights, crime is happening, drug abuse also increased, environmental problems, bioethical issues, all these are also the main problems which are arising from the extensive use of artificial intelligence. To curtail these things, they have brought some safeguards in the name of AI convention. The most important thing is, it is a legally binding treaty, you have to keep in mind. Then it is also setting up some targets. Okay, targets also will be part of this convention, and you have to understand, for example, with respect to biopiracy. Biopiracy means whatever the biological information or the traditional knowledge you enjoy generally, that cannot be misused. So the persons who actually have that knowledge have to benefit from that, and not the persons who have stolen the data or have robbed that particular data. That is what we see in the MNC's case also. So one such example is this Convention on Biological Diversity, where there is a principle under Cartagena Protocol. See here, this is a convention which is having one protocol as Cartagena. Another protocol under CBD is Nagoya Protocol. Okay, like this one convention can have many protocols. So what is this AI convention saying? So with respect to all the sectors what we have mentioned, there is a misuse of AI. So that is why, to stop all these things, we are bringing such convention which is stipulating what can be done, what cannot be done. To regulate the use of AI, this was brought. So you can see this protocol is on biosafety. Biosafety means, see, this Cartagena protocol is mainly dealing with living modified organisms, LMOs, or genetically modified organisms. So what happens when you are modifying an organism genetically? What happens? It can cause some threat to the native biodiversity, right? Native plants and all. So at that time you need to take care about them also. That is what this Cartagena protocol is saying. So what are the biosafety measures with respect to this? Then what is this convention? According to the convention, definition of artificial intelligence is, it is a machine-based system for explicit and implicit objectives. From the inputs it receives, it can generate certain outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, decisions, anything. Okay, so whatever the input you give, ChatGPT, so for whatever you ask, you are giving some input and it is giving you output. Okay, so generally which the human perform, in case if machine performs, that is what we call as artificial intelligence. Then what is the aim here? Aim of this convention is to ensure the activities within the life cycle. Always artificial intelligence have to be exercised in a limited way. It should not go beyond in a way it is uncontrollable. That is the objective of this convention, so that it is consistent with human rights, democracy and rule of law. These three things cannot be compromised even by the use of artificial intelligence. That is what the main objective of this particular convention. Okay, although this is not Indian part, you just have to remember, because sometimes already UPSC have asked, when European Union passed this General Data Protection Act, they have asked, giving the name, this is in relation to which particular bodies, like that straightforward question they have asked. So when it's any particular grouping passes such unique law and all, you just need to know what is the main feature. You need not go into very depth, but you just need to know to which body it is associated. So then here you can see application, it covers both public as well as private actors also. It is equally applicable. Exceptions are only in case of national security, research, development and testing. This is not applicable. This law will not be applying. Then it doesn't regulate military applications also. This is one another thing you have to keep in mind. Then what is the importance of this is, it is again reaffirming the existing rights. In the name of artificial intelligence, you cannot take the human rights, rule of law, democratic rights and all. At the same time, governmental responsibility is also emphasized. There is an obligation on the government to protect these rights. That is what clearly said. Then comprehensive approach. It is also trying to give the rights in a comprehensive way. in a detailed way. That is what the objective. Then you have next topic of monsoon. So what is this onset of monsoon mean? If you have seen in the newspaper, IMD said monsoons have arrived, right? So where they have arrived? They have arrived the coast of Kerala and Andaman and Nicobar also. Okay, way back first they touch Andaman and Nicobar. Mainland India, Kerala is the first place where they normally touch. So what is this monsoon? What is monsoon? Monsoon is derived from a term called Mausam. Mausam means in Arabic language seasonal reversal of winds. Okay, seasonal reversal of winds is what you call as monsoon. Okay, so why monsoon arrives in India? This was created in, IMD is created in 1875, way back, okay, under Ministry of Earth Sciences. You know, it is a meteorological organization which gives all climate and weather updates with respect to India. Okay, IMD in 1875 under Ministry of Earth Sciences. Earth Sciences, okay. Then global level you have World Meteorological Organization. Same way, another job is being done by WMO, World Meteorological Organization, right? So here you need to know, you have already known about global air circulation, right? What do you have here in the center? Very good, equator. Then, oh, that's very great. Tropic of Cancer, okay. Then here, Tropic of Capricorn, okay. North Pole, Southern Pole, reverse. Huh? Then here you have, what is this called? Zone of Convergence or ITCZ. What is ITCZ? Intertropical Convergence Zone. You are all good at geography, I understood. So intertropical means what type of things are converging here? When some winds are converging only, you are calling it as intertropical, right? Intertropical means between tropics, some winds are converging at this place. That is why you are naming it as ITCZ. This is a zone of low pressure. Okay. So here, northeast trade winds and southeast trade winds you have. Below which you have, what westerlies you call? Here, polar easterlies. Then polar easterlies. Then what happens? We are only confined about this zone now. Okay. What happens here? This means these are permanent winds which blow from northeastern direction. They are coming from northeast. They are not going towards northeast. In geography, always winds will be named over the location from which they originate. Northeast, okay, in southeast. What happens here? You know, generally wind will move from high pressure to low pressure. So that means if this is low pressure, this has to be high pressure zone, right? What happens from high pressure? Here also high pressure you have. It has to come here, converging. Okay, that is why northeast and southeast trade winds, where they're converging, is what we call as ITCZ. But that is not a fixed way. Okay, ITCZ generally changes with apparent movement of the sun. So sun generally will not Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn. So on June 21st, exactly it will be on overhead of Tropic of Cancer. Again, when it will be on December 21st or 22nd, it will be exactly overhead on Tropic of Capricorn. This is what you know generally. But what happens here? During the summer season, consider this is the equator and you have India here, right? So India is in the southern hemisphere, right? Northern hemisphere. I think it is in southern hemisphere. Northern hemisphere. Okay. March era. So here you have northeast trade winds. Okay. So what actually happens? Southeast trade winds ante ila untai kada. Equator. They again have to converge here. So what happens here? During summer, what happens here? Intense low pressure is created on the mainland India, and the ocean comparatively have high pressure. Even this is also same Indian Ocean, right? So generally winds have to cross high pressure towards low pressure. So when they're crossing here, this is the Lakshman Rekha or equator. What happens there? Due to Coriolis force, they have to turn towards right, deflect. Coriolis force, you know, which is responsible for rotation of the earth. So due to Coriolis force, what happens? Winds deflect right in the northern hemisphere and they deflect towards left in the southern hemisphere, right? Okay. So now southeast trade winds are crossing the equator. When they deflect towards east, what happens? Right, I'm saying. When they deflect towards right, what happens? They change their direction as southwest. Okay. Southeast, if they bend towards right, then the direction will be southwest. As they're entering India in the southwestern direction, we are naming them as southwest monsoons. Actually, these are southeast trade winds which are there in the southern hemisphere, but due to intense heating of the Indian mainland compared to the Indian Ocean, as the low pressure is created during the summer, these southeast trade winds are crossing the equator and they're entering in the name of southwest monsoon. The same thing, okay, which is bringing us more than 85% of Indian rainfall. What we require is coming through southwest monsoon. So what is the reason? Because why we are having this monsoons? First reason I told you is differential heating of land and sea. Yes or no? Land generally heats quick and also it leaves the heat also in the same way. But whereas sea, it generally doesn't maintain the same thing, right? So the differential heating between land and the sea. Here it is having low pressure, it is having high pressure. That is why monsoons are crossing, right? If there is uniformity, then they don't change their path, right? That is the first reason. Then ITCZ is the second reason. Generally, according to the movement, it also will move. Then that is the third reason. Then first one, differential heating of the land and sea. Then ITCZ, this is a zone of low pressure. Then it is concentrated in the summers around the Gangetic Plain area, right? Then high pressure over Indian Ocean. What do you say? High pressure over Indian Ocean, okay. Then extensive heating of the Tibetan Plateau, good. Extensive heating of the Tibetan Plateau. Where Tibetan Plateau is there? Here is the Tibetan Plateau, right? If it is extensively heated up, okay, then it also attracts the winds towards it, right? Then jet streams. What are jet streams? Fast flowing winds in the upper atmosphere, right? These are not surface winds. So generally during summer, which will be most active? Tropical easterly jet stream. This tropical easterly jet stream will create the burst of the monsoon. The monsoon will break out suddenly because of this tropical easterly jet stream. Okay. So these are various reasons why monsoon happens over India. You understood what is the phenomenon of monsoon. So what is the objective here? They wanted to increase private sector participation in the space, especially. Why? Because see, if you are diversifying the space opportunities, then what happens? You can allow more space ambitions, right? Yes or no? If ISRO is only taking care about large satellites, small satellites and everything, okay, then we cannot fulfill our ambitions and we cannot be competitive compared to other global parts, right? That is why ISRO is allowing the private participation in the space recent times, okay. So major missions will be launched anyhow by ISRO only, but at least for the time being, Earth observatory satellites or small satellites, even for them we are allowing the private role to be played. So that is why recently what we have given a chance for LVM-3. LVM-3 is the launch vehicle. We are asking this to be commercialized. Commercialized means in case if any private agencies of the space, if they develop such LVM-3 and all, that can be used by ISRO. Now because ISRO is itself developing all the launch vehicles required for itself. So but if private can take part in this LVM-3 and if they make up and it makes to ISRO, then ISRO's job will be easy. That is why they are asking for more private entry into the space activities. So this is what you have to understand. Same LVM-3 we have used in Chandrayaan-2 and Chandrayaan-3. That is a launch vehicle, okay. So which can be placed in geosynchronous transfer orbit. So what is this geosynchronous transfer orbit? Geosynchronous. Geo means what? Earth. Synchronous means it will be in sync with Earth. So that the pace at which Earth is rotating with itself, same pace will be followed by that particular satellite also. Initially, it will be placed in geosynchronous orbit. Later, it will be transferred to the particular orbit, because here Chandrayaan-2 and 3 we have seen. That means initially it will be placed in Earth's orbit. Rotating around the Earth's orbit, it has to change its path and it has to enter into the lunar orbit, right? That is the moon's orbit. So transfer orbits are used when you have to place a satellite in very high orbits. Generally, you cannot directly send a satellite into, see if this is a orbit, lunar orbit you want to send. You cannot directly send in this way. So what you will do, you will try to place it like this, it will be rotating and then it will enter into here, okay. That is what we call geosynchronous transfer orbit. Transfer means it will involve transfer of orbit from Earth orbit to lunar orbit. But it is initially in the sync with Earth's speed and rotation. That is why when you see at the pace at which Earth is rotating, same pace will be followed by satellite. That is why if you say observe from one particular point, always it will be at the same point, but it's not fixed there. Earth is also rotating, it is also revolving around the Earth at the same speed and intensity. That is what the orbit of this geosynchronous transfer orbit. And you can see new heavy lift launch satellites like LVM-3 we are trying to achieve, even so that they can carry 4,000 kgs of payload. Payload means weight of the satellite, okay. So this is the objective, so that we wanted to achieve in a cost effective manner. Then about space sector, Indian space sector is already valued at $9.6 billion in 2020. That means 2.3% of global space industry. That's it, only 2%. So we wanted to increase it to $13 billion by 2025, and by 2030 we also want to achieve 10% of global space economy. So to increase this, along with ISRO, we need the participation of private space agencies. That is the objective. So Department of Space decided to encourage the participation of private in space activities, and especially ISRO is also asking them to participate. So what is the benefit in case if you participate? Innovation and competition. Competition, because till now ISRO is only having the monopoly, right? Only public agency. So everything they only have to take care. But if you're allowing for private, so different competing agencies will be there. So with competition, more innovation at less cost. Because see, if you are producing at more cost, ISRO will not buy with you. It will take from another industry or company. So generally, with low cost, you have to produce it. So innovation, competition will increase. At the same time, global collaborations also can increase. Like for example, in the recent times, we have discussed about LUPEX mission, Lunar Polar Exploration Mission. This is between India and Japan, JAXA. And we have NISAR also. We have discussed this also in the current affairs class. NISAR means NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar mission. This is also launched by NASA and ISRO. So this is also a global collaboration where 2 and 3 countries are involving in one particular mission. Okay. So this also can increase with private participation. Then national development also, when we are having private participation, we can launch many satellites for earth monitoring, resource observations, remote sensing and all. And you can also have cost competitiveness also. I told you, when many competitive private players are there, for them who are making it at lesser cost only will buy, no? That is the objective, right? So it will make our space launches more competitive also in the terms of cost and all. Then challenges, regulatory hurdles are there. That means still, although you're allowing private participation, there is so much regulatory mechanism in place. So that is also curtailing the participation of private space. Technological transfer. So not all have technology, how to develop. So if you want, you have money, you have idea, but you don't know how to make it, then ISRO generally helps. So this technological transfer is also not that easy now, and you also need skilled workforce, aeronautical engineers and all this, no? So that is why, and these are the steps taken by India. This is important from mains perspective. In 2024, Center has amended its FDI policy. What is FDI? Foreign direct investment, okay? So where any individual or a company is investing money in India, an Indian business sector, especially with an option of, in FDI, what is the option? They can invest more than 10% of the share, and they can also have managerial control. When they invest more than 10%, we call it as FDI. So that is why it is not easy to come, easy to go with FDIs. But on the other hand, we also have FPIs or FIIs, we call, foreign portfolio investors. That is less than 10%. So they generally come easy, they can easily go also. That is why they are volatile. So when any country increases its interest rate, they shift the money there. That is why we cannot rely on FPIs, but FDIs are good because they are stable investments. What happened? Recently, India has increased FDI from even up to 74% from existing 49%. So we are increasing more investments into space. That is also helping in diversifying the space, and in manufacturing component, we have increased till 100%. Generally, FDI will be automatic and approval route. Two types of FDIs will be there. Automatic means in some sectors which are not that highly important for the country's security and all. For example, other than defense and all these things, in those sectors, automatically you can invest 100%. For example, it's not directly 100, 49, 74, 100%, how much ever that limit can be there, you can invest without government's permission. Automatic means. Approval route means in certain sensitive sectors like defense, space, or atomic energy and all this, there is need of government regulation. No, you cannot ask, for example, what in case China intervenes or invests in our space sector. There need to be some regulatory mechanism, right? That is why we are only giving for certain sectors not automatic approval route. Approval means finance ministry has to give approval for that particular investment. That is what we call approval route. So FDIs comes into India through automatic route or approval route. Okay. So in this space also we are increasing the FDI permissions and limits. Then in 2020, you can see IN-SPACe was established, Indian National Space Promotion Authorization Center. Especially this was established to encourage private players industry, especially in space in India. Okay. Two things you have to keep in mind. In the recent times, we have NSIL. New Space India Limited is a second commercial arm of ISRO. And you have IN-SPACe. This is the area where your NSIL, New Space India Limited. This is the second commercial arm of ISRO. First one is, what is the first commercial arm of ISRO? Antrix Corporation. What is commercial arm means? Sometimes you will also place foreign satellites through our launch vehicles, no? Yes or no? At that time, they'll pay us, no? This commercial aspect will be dealt by Antrix Corporation previously. We also have this. Along with this, recently we also have created New Space India Limited. So this is a second commercial arm of ISRO. Okay. Then you have IN-SPACe. This is to increase private participation in space. So don't get confused. These basic things can be asked. Always do remember, Department of Space is directly under Prime Minister's control. Okay, there is no space ministry as a whole. When ISRO was created, 1969. Okay. Then in 2021 also, we have allowed private companies in terms of geospatial data. What is geospatial data? Simple. Geospatial data means when you're collecting the data through satellites with respect to geographical things. Geographical things means forests or rivers, water level or oceans or any temperature differences, all these natural resources. Okay, you're identifying geographical data, but that too is also in the name of satellites. If you collect the data, we call as geospatial data. Okay, so with respect to that also, government has released some restrictions. And you also have National Geospatial Policy of 2022, where we wanted to democratize the data with respect to geospatial and increase the digital presence of the data. And New Space Policy 2023, this is important. You have to, and in science and technology, in space technology, this will be taught. Okay, so you need to know certain features where we wanted to increase, along with the ISRO, government, private role also has to increase. That is the main objective of Indian Space Policy, where we wanted to increase Indian space sector's contribution in global space. That is the objective of Indian Space Policy. Certain features will be there. Then, as coming to the prelims part, we have this, you can understand from the image, it is Virupaksha temple in Hampi. Why it is in news? Because recently it has, a small part got collapsed due to rains. Okay, so you need to know Hampi is the ancient name of Vijayanagara. Okay, Vijayanagara is the medieval kingdom which has ruled southern part, especially Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh part in the southern India. Okay, so this was formed by Harihara Raya and Bukkaraya in 1336 AD. Okay, after the Delhi Sultanate. Okay, they have declined. The persons who till then, okay, served as feudatories or whatever you say to the Delhi Sultanate, they have declared their own independence. Two brothers, Harihara and Bukkaraya, they have formed this Vijayanagara dynasty in 1336 AD under the influence of Saint Vidyaranya. Okay, so they made the capital Hampi, we call modern day. At the time it is Vijayanagara, which is on the banks of river Tungabhadra. Vijayanagara as an empire is very favorite area of UPSC. Without a question on Vijayanagara, there won't be question paper set. If you read entirely Vijayanagara, one question guarantee. Every year minimum one question is coming. Okay, high important area in medieval India. Okay, so four dynasties have ruled Vijayanagara. First one, Saluva, Tuluva, Sangama, Saluva, Tuluva, Aravidu. So Tuluva, you know, Sri Krishna Devaraya, which is one of the greatest rulers of Vijayanagara. With Battle of Tallikota, Vijayanagara came to an end, but later also they'll continue till 1600s, but they lost their prominence by this time. So Vijayanagara always had conflict with Bahmanis, okay, because of Raichur, Doab and all. Okay, so at that time, the Raichur, Doab is nothing but where two rivers meet. Okay, that fertile area that is prosperous in agriculture terms. When agriculture is flourishing, what you have? More taxes can be received by the state, right? That is one of the objective, because those who control Raichur, Doab, they get more powers with respect to taxation and all. So Bahmanis want to expand it, even Vijayanagara wants. Another reason why they have continuously fought is Golconda diamonds. Bahmanis want it, and Vijayanagara also want it. Okay, like this they have always confrontations. And this Virupaksha temple is a World Heritage Site, okay, under UNESCO. And how many UNESCO World Heritage Sites are there? As on date, 42 are there. In UNESCO World Heritage Sites, you have to classify into cultural, natural and mixed. Okay, out of these 42, one is mixed, that is Kanchenjunga in Sikkim, 7 natural, rest of the 34, right? 8 plus 34, yes, 42. So 34 are cultural. And UNESCO recent one got added in as 42nd one is sacred ensembles of Hoysalas. Halebeid, Hoysala temples are there, no? That is from Hoysala dynasty. Okay, so they also sacred ensembles of Hoysala. See, anything from India, if it gets registered as UNESCO World Heritage Site, there can be a question on that particular thing. Okay, sacred ensembles of Hoysalas. Ensembles of Hoysala. This is during Hoysala dynasty. Hoysala also have ruled Karnataka part with capital as Dwarasamudram. Okay, they are the feudatories of Kalyani Chalukyas. Okay, Kalyani Chalukyas are feudatories of Rashtrakutas. Rashtrakutas are feudatories of Badami Chalukyas. Okay, like this you will know many things in medieval. Don't get confused. Again, the area of influence is important. There 42nd one. 41st one is Shantiniketan, Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, that is 41st one. Okay, 40th one is Dholavira, Gujarat, Indus Valley Civilization. 39th is Ramappa in Varangal. Like this, you need to go back at least the recent ones which got recognized from India. And you can see this was constructed during Prouda Devaraya's term. Okay, these type of things can be asked. Last year in 2023, what they have asked is, who have constructed dam on Tungabhadra river? It is Devaraya I of Vijayanagara dynasty. So these type of unique things they'll ask you. Every year one question guarantee from Vijayanagara. That is a favorite area of UPSC. Okay. Then it belongs to, at that time, even before that also there is some temple. This is not during Vijayanagara, but initially there was a temple in 7th century. On that particular thing they have developed this Virupaksha. It is Lord Shiva's temple. Okay. Sometimes it is important. And it is constructed in Dravidian architecture. Okay. You know Dravidian and Nagara architectures. Dravidian temple style Sikra will be in pyramidal in shape. It's not circular like Nagara. Okay. And you have boundary walls also, 4 side entrances is also one of the common feature. Having temple pond or lake is also one of the feature associated with Dravidian architecture. Okay, so like this we have certain things. Then next you have is WIPO. WIPO means World Intellectual Property Organization Treaty. So recently with respect to protecting the intellectual property rights, genetic resources and traditional knowledge, there is some agreement between member states of WIPO. WIPO is a specialized agency of UN with respect to intellectual property protection. What is intellectual property? Anything which is coming from your intellectual ability, patent, copyright. Okay, you have traditional knowledge, geographical indication tags, anything. All these are considered as intellectual property. So to safeguard at the global level, we have WIPO. Okay. So what is this? Why they have agreed to this recent treaty is to address biopiracy. What is biopiracy? See, biological organisms or living organisms, for example, okay, if you have one particular plant, that is a herbal plant, generally who have good idea about that herbal plant? Tribal people and the local people have. So if you take the data or the particular input from the tribal people, and if you utilize that data for your benefit without transferring the benefit to the native tribals, that is considered as biopiracy. Piracy in movies also means without the authorization of the particular director or producer, you are watching it legally, not legally, no. That is what same way biopiracy means, without transferring the benefit of the traditional knowledge to the native people or the tribal people. If you are making use of it, we call it as biopiracy. So in the recent times, what happens? There is increase in the trend of biopiracy. Okay. So most of the MNCs are exploiting the tribals and they're capturing the data and they are getting patented and they're enjoying the benefit without passing to the tribals. So to address this, there is an agreement. Then with respect to utilization also, who have to utilize that particular resource and how they have to make it. So these are all the things which wanted to be addressed by this treaty. This is the first WIPO treaty which is going to protect indigenous people and communities. Indigenous means tribal. Then patent applications, if you see, any patent applications according to the recent one has to disclose their origin, from where you are getting the data. Okay, that MNCs when they are filing patent, they should know and they have to file what is the source behind the traditional knowledge, that is clearly mentioned. Membership is any WIPO country has to agree to this, and this does not apply to the treaty. Before coming into force, whatever the patents are applied, for them this will not apply. From the time being, afterwards, after signing only it will apply. Okay. Then India is also a member of WIPO. It was established in 1967 and previously we have this BIPRI Instead of this, we got now WIPO. It is a specialized agency. We have almost 15 specialized agencies of UN. Among that, one is WIPO. And you can see this is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. 193 countries are members of WIPO, including India. The next one you have is Article 329B of Indian Constitution. This is also in news. So what is this 329B saying is, you're exempting the judicial review in terms of electoral process. Generally, that means you cannot directly involve courts, okay, to inquire into electoral process. Why? Because if every time you're dragging some particular issue to the courts means it will generally stop the electoral process, no? That is why to have continuity and free and fair elections, only when there are some petitions and it is of serious nature, then only courts have to entertain electoral petitions. Otherwise, it should not intervene. That is what the limitation said by Article 329B of Indian Constitution. And recently, Supreme Court said election means it doesn't mean only on the polling day. Right from the election schedule announcement till the date of result, everything will be part of election only. So all this period, generally courts should not intervene in the process of elections. You can see recently Supreme Court adjourned, means they have stopped a petition filed by ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms, seeking directions to the Election Commission of India with respect to public voter turnouts. Okay, how much is the percentage? There is a controversy that has come into picture, no? Because General Election Commission gives primary estimates. So they have given with respect to some phases what happened recently. But later, after 48 hours, it was observed that there is 5% increase in the voter turnout. Generally, that will not be the case. So they are saying government has manipulated votes and it has gained some advantage, because 5% increase suddenly is a big thing. That is why opposition parties are saying, why don't you release all the data properly? Means Election Commission said there is no legal mandate to disclose voter turnout. Okay, so in that case, ADR is asking Supreme Court to issue directions to Election Commission with respect to voter turnout. But what is restricting the Supreme Court is Article 329B, because courts cannot directly intervene, okay, in the very nature of electoral process. You can see this Article 324 is giving the powers to Election Commission of India to conduct free and fair elections. 329 is saying judicial role in the electoral affairs. You can see 329A is prohibiting judiciary from challenging any laws related to electoral seat allocation. 329B, this was amended by 19th Constitutional Amendment in 1966, saying elections can only be questioned when there is an election petition presented according to the law. Okay, so who is generally having the authority is high courts. Okay, with respect to MP elections or MLA elections, if you have any dispute or if you are not believing in that particular affair, then you have to file a case before the High Court. In which particular area that seat is there, according to the jurisdiction, you have to file before that respective High Court. From High Court, through review only, it has to go to the Supreme Court. Okay, so generally Supreme Court doesn't have direct intervention in this regard. This is what you have to keep in mind. So electoral process are restrained from judicial intervention. Then Supreme Court also said election in Article 329B includes entire electoral process. Right from the beginning to the end, everything is covered. It doesn't mean only on the date of election. Then you also have small island developing states. So what happened recently? They have agreed, okay? So they have assembled small island developing states, or those very less developing countries or small island states which are facing the brunt of climate change. So they have convened recently in Global Environmental Facility, which is the main monetary mechanism, okay, of many conventions, is helping these small island developing countries in fighting against climate change. So here you need to know what are these small island developing countries, which are very small in area, island countries, again which are facing many economic vulnerabilities, at the same time economic as well as environmental vulnerabilities, especially countries or islands in Caribbean Sea, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, okay, Oceania, Micronesia, you have all those small islands, no, all those are the countries which have assembled. So why they are discussing this? Mainly environmental issues on development, okay. So then what is this Global Environmental Facility is important from environment point of view. This was established in 1992 during the Rio Earth Summit, okay. So in Rio Earth Summit this was constituted, and you have to keep in mind this is supporting 5 major conventions of UN. So one is UN CBD, UN CCD, UNFCCC, in Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, and Minamata Convention on Mercury Pollution. These are the 5 environmental conventions which are being financed by Global Environmental Facility. UNCBD, United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, CCD. Desertification, UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So these are the 3 major conventions part of Rio Earth Summit 1992. All this will be taught in environment. Okay, at this time being, you just understand. For these 3 important things, and you also have a Stockholm Convention. This is with respect to POPs, means persistent organic pollutants, whichever the pollutants that are staying in the atmosphere for long. Okay, persistent means for long, if they stay without decomposing, that is are called POPs. So that is covered by Stockholm Convention. Then you have Minamata Convention with respect to mercury pollution. Okay, so these are 5 conventions which are being financed by Global Environmental Facility. 184 countries, including India, is part of it. It is headquartered in Washington DC in USA, and World Bank is acting as a trustee to this fund. Okay, it is headquartered in Washington DC. Then you have Zimbabwe's new currency ZiG. Here you need to understand, see, every country's currency, okay, it is backed by its own central bank. And see how you are evaluating Indian rupee value with respect to dollar, right? Okay, so daily it depends on the demand and supply. So based on the demand and supply of Indian rupee on comparison with US dollar, your Indian rupee values will be determined. But what happened in Zimbabwe's case? Zimbabwe is facing hyperinflation. Hyperinflation means inflation as a term, it indicates rise in prices. What is hyperinflation means? In a day, if it is increasing more than 50% compared to the previous thing, if it is increasing by half every day, inflation, then we call it as hyperinflation. As it is facing more inflation, before this introduction of currency, you know how much is the value of Zimbabwe currency with respect to US dollar? 1 US dollar is equal to 30,000 Zimbabwe currency. 30,000. That is the level of inflation. 200% inflation they are facing. So they have, that means the currency doesn't have any value, right? As they have lost value in the currency, even if you have this much currency bundle with you, that is of no use now, because there is no demand here of the currency. So to revert this situation, what they have done is, they have introduced ZiG as a new currency, which is not backed by dollar or government, but it depends on the value of gold. This particular currency, ZiG, okay, it will be determined based on the value of gold. So how much is the value of gold on that particular day? Based on that, the value of the currency will be determined. It's not like rupee equal to dollar, this much amount of dollar and all. Okay, so that this is what the version previously we used to have. It is first UK which used to follow this, but what happened again? At that time, gold prices used to be stable and they have followed it. But now, you know, gold has become much volatile. So it is becoming very difficult. Every day you have to check the gold prices, then you have to ascertain this, means it is becoming difficult. So initially, before having currencies and this international valuations and all, we used to have such mechanism. But now every country has reverted to dollar. In comparison with that, we are determining our currencies. So even now, because they are facing hyperinflation and they are trying to come out of it, they are using ZiG, which is backed by gold. The value of the currency will be determined based on gold, not by international value or dollar. Okay, so here you need to know fiat currency and gold backed currency. What is the difference? Fiat currency is a situation where our Indian rupee is there. That means it is having legal tender. Normally, see, for example, if the rupee note you have, okay, so if that rupee note is not backed by central government, does it have any value? No. But on the other hand, what happens is gold backed currency is there, right? So that means if that currency is not having any legal tender, it is having the same value as a gold, right? That is what the difference you need to know between a fiat currency, which is Indian currency supported by government, central bank as legal tender. On the other hand, you have currency backed by gold. This is ZiG currency. Clear now? What is the difference? And why they're introducing? Because dollar, in comparison with dollar, the value has increased tremendously in Zimbabwe, and they're fighting hyperinflation. So to adjust the situation, they have come with this new thing. Okay, we don't know how this help actually, but they're trying many things now. Okay, this is what you have to keep in mind. It has a fixed value, it doesn't change. Okay, it will be in terms of gold, that is a precious metal. So you can see money supply is constrained by available gold reserves. How many gold reserves they have, based on that only. So here fiat currency doesn't have any intrinsic value, means Indian rupee, until unless backed by government, central bank, you don't have any value to it. But gold, backed currencies will have the value of gold attached with it. So normally fiat value will be depend on demand and supply in the market, but it's not backed by any physical commodity like gold. On the other hand, here the gold backing will be there for ZiG. That is what the difference you have to understand. Then you have AI anchors. AI means artificial intelligence. Why we are discussing this is DD, you know, Doordarshan, public broadcaster. So they have introduced two AI anchors, Krishi and Bhumi. So this is with respect to giving information all round. That means 24/7 without any breaks to the farmers, especially weather updates and all the whatever the information they required in their own language. Okay, to facilitate this, two AI anchors were initiated by DD Kisan. So this is what you have to keep in mind. This is the first government TV channel in the AI anchoring field. So what is the objective is to work tirelessly 24/7 and without fatigue, means without any disturbance or strain. So this is the objective, you can read. Then minor forest produce. What is minor forest produce? Anything other than bamboo and timber. So bamboo also is considered. So even anything without timber. Okay. So other than timber, any forest produce you derive is called minor forest produce. Why it is in use? Because certain tribal people from Odisha, they're asking this kendu or tendu leaves, which generally help in tobacco or making and all. So for them, they're asking this minor forest produce. What is the objective is, if this is given, then they can get better remunerative benefit out of it. Okay, so you need to know what is a legal backing is. Scheduled tribes, we have discussed in the other class. No, Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act, also called Forest Rights Act. This is giving this concept of minor forest produce. It includes bamboo, brush shoots, stumps, cane, tussar, cocoons, honey, wax, lac, anything. Okay, so other than timber, anything which you get from forest is considered as minor forest produce. What is the benefit of it? It gives livelihood for the indigenous people or the tribal people. That is the objective. So all this Forest Rights Act empowers the local community. Kendu leaves are those nationalized projects, nationalized products like bamboo, salt seed and all. Odisha is the third largest producer of kendu leaves, and it is main source of livelihood for many tribal. They collect from the forest, they roll it up, tobacco, BDs, and they'll sell it. So that they're earning some money. This is why they're asking for. Then you have next one is National Fossil Park. This is situated in Madhya Pradesh. So these type of things. Okay, fossil means ancient remains of plant or animal. Okay, those were called as fossils. So the name of this is Gugwa National Fossil Park. In this map, there are all the fossil parks and their locations given. You can see them here. Why it is mentioned is, in the recent times, this particular place we have found some prehistoric artifacts. That is why it is in news. It is in Madhya Pradesh. Tropical dry deciduous forests are seen here, and you can see these type of forests and plants can be seen. Neem, date palm, eucalyptus and all. Even dinosaur eggs are also found there. Okay. Then you have Major Radhika Sen. Why this was mentioned is, she won the UN Peacekeepers Award. Okay. So for her efforts in Democratic Republic of Congo. So from every country, they have to send some persons from the armed forces, okay, in UN peacekeeping missions. For her role, this 2023 United Nations Military Gender Advocate of the Year award was awarded to her. And you have to keep in mind this resolution, Security Council resolution of 1325. Sometimes they can ask you, UNSC resolution 1325 is related to, it is peacekeeping missions, okay, of UN. Then this is what I have mentioned, who gives this and on what basis. The next one you have is Nishi tribe. Okay, why this is there? One woman from Nishi tribe, she has climbed Mount Everest for the first time. She became the 5th Arunachal Pradesh person. At the same time, she became the first woman from this tribe. Okay, you just have to know the location and what are the unique characteristics of these tribes. So these people are based in Arunachal Pradesh, they are having slash and burn agriculture or shifting agriculture as their main way of sustenance. And there's also one unique thing is they allow polygyny. Polygyny means one person can have multiple wives. Okay, that is allowed there. You can go and settle as Nishi tribes if you want. Then who got reacted, they can. Okay, then descent patrilineally also. Descent is patrilineally means from the father to son it will be passed. Okay, this is what. And neither they use caste system or they don't have any class divisions. Okay, that is a good thing. At the same time, they consider women. Nishi consider the woman as sign of peace, progress and prosperity. Okay, that is what you have to keep in mind. And they also have this reciprocal marital exchange. You know, girl and boy this side and that side, there will be exchange. So this is all with respect to this. If you have any doubts, you can come. Thank you.